Have you ever had that gut feeling something was off? I did, and it all started with an old friend at a grocery store. This is the story of how I uncovered my wife's shocking secret and the chaos that followed. Let's get into it. I learned a tough lesson about how quickly an ordinary man's life can spiral into chaos. A few years back, when this story began, my family included my wife, Laura, 36, and me, David Benson, 40, along with our 2 kids, Chloe, 10, and Ethan, 7. We weren't the happiest family in our small Midwestern community, but we held it together, mostly because we believed it was the right thing to do for our children. The real trouble started when I ran into an old high school buddy, Daniel Wilson, one Thursday after work at the grocery store. I hadn't seen him in a while, and since the store was packed that day, we had time to catch up. As we talked, Daniel mentioned that his wife, Emma, worked at the same place where my wife had been employed for the past 6 months. He then casually asked, "I didn't see you at the Christmas party our wives went to, but are you coming to the farewell party for their company's owner?" I replied, "I wasn't invited, but I'd like to go." Daniel seemed surprised. He said, "Of course, you're invited. All the spouses are invited. Why wouldn't you be? I'll check with Emma, but I'm sure you're on the list. See you there, buddy." It turned out that the big company bash, held just 2 months after the Christmas event, was because the old owners had sold their shares to a large investment firm, and they wanted to thank everyone before the new management took over. I clearly remembered that Christmas party. It was Laura's first at her new job, and she told me, quite apologetically, that I wasn't invited. She had even gone out and bought a fancy new dress for the occasion, looking as gorgeous as ever. But when she came home at 3 a.m., slightly drunk and a little messy, I couldn't help but ask questions. After some back and forth, I told her I believed her explanation about the party and the nightcap at a friend's house. She cried and swore up and down that nothing had happened between her and any other man. Despite her tears, I had my suspicions, but without solid proof, what could I really do? When I got home from my errands that evening, I immediately told Laura that I'd bumped into my old friend, Daniel, and that his wife worked at the same place she did. Laura's face grew concerned as she asked, "What's her name?" "Emma Wilson." "Do you know her?" I responded. "No, I don't," she said quickly. "But Daniel told me that all the spouses were invited to your Christmas party. So, who stood in as your +1, and where exactly were you that night?" Her face went pale as she muttered, "I've explained before that I thought spouses weren't invited. I was new, and I must have misunderstood the invite." "So, you were the only person at the entire company who didn't grasp a simple invitation?" I pressed. "I'll find out who was with you after the party, and when I do, he'll regret it." She broke down, sobbing, "I've told you 100 times. It was just a small group at someone's house, a few drinks, and some dancing. There's no reason for you to be upset or jealous." Her story had too many holes, but I couldn't dig deeper without some kind of evidence. "So," I asked, "am I invited to the next company event?" She hesitated, that strange look crossing her face again. She hadn't mentioned any upcoming party to me, but now that she knew I was aware of the invitations, she said, "Yes, of course. I've already booked both of us, but I forgot to tell you." I had serious doubts about whether Laura was telling me the truth. Our marriage, needless to say, was hanging by a thread. Any thoughts of intimacy between us felt pointless at that stage. Then things took another turn for the worse the following Friday afternoon. I had taken a few hours off from my job to run some errands, and Laura typically finished her shift by 2 p.m. on Fridays. So, both of us were home when the phone rang. I answered, and all I could hear was someone in a car with background music playing, but the caller hung up without saying a word. Laura asked me who it was. I responded jokingly, "Probably your boyfriend," but he hung up when he realized I answered. The comment was intended to be harmless, but I couldn't help but notice how she froze for a moment before she angrily shouted, "You're being ridiculous. What the hell is wrong with you? It was just a joke, I replied, but with that overreaction, now I'm not so sure. Was I onto something? She took a deep breath and replied quietly, no, you're not right. It was just one of your jealous jokes. But I'm sorry for snapping at you. Work was awful today, but that's no excuse. I'm sorry for my bad mood. Later that evening, Laura wore a much more conservative outfit than usual, and her mood was far from upbeat as we headed to the event. The party was held at one of the city's finest hotels, with dinner being served at several round tables rather than the typical long ones. We were seated with 4 other couples, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Laura knew all the other women at our table quite well. The way she acted made it seem like my presence was an inconvenience, something that had ruined her plans for a more enjoyable night. After the meal, as we enjoyed coffee in a glass of brandy, her manager approached our table for a quick chat. When he saw me sitting beside Laura, he said, "Ah, you must be Laura's husband. We missed you at the Christmas party. Sorry you couldn't attend." I responded, I wasn't invited, or at least that's what Laura told me. He glanced at Laura and asked, all spouses were invited. How did you miss that? I added, she came home really late that night and wasn't in great shape, so I figured she preferred someone from the office over me. The other couples at the table couldn't help but chuckle, and Laura's face turned bright red. Her boss looked uncomfortable and said, I had no idea, before politely excusing himself from the table. You should know, I remarked, there are over 200 people working at your company. Laura began to cry, and I'm pretty sure the other couples felt the awkwardness of the moment, as they all excused themselves to go to the restroom. Even I headed to the restroom, where I ended up chatting with one of the other spouses. He told me that he and his wife had been seated near Laura at the Christmas party. He remembered her because his wife had commented on her unusual last name, and he mentioned that Laura had spent the whole evening cozied up next to one of her male colleagues. I never thought something like this would happen to me, but I knew that many men before me had stumbled upon the harsh reality of a cheating spouse through some random, unexpected event. The truth hit me hard, like a punch to the gut. Sure, I had noticed that the spark between Laura and me had been dimming lately, but every marriage has its ups and downs. I had thought things would turn around soon. I didn't see Laura again after that, and one of her coworkers mentioned that she had left the party. When she didn't answer her cell phone and our babysitter didn't pick up the house phone, it dawned on me that Laura had gone home and sent the sitter away. I spent a little time at the bar, and to my relief, nobody brought her up again. When I got home, I found Laura fast asleep in our bed. The following day was, by far, the worst in our 13 years of marriage. Laura screamed and yelled, refusing to tell me where she had been after the Christmas party. When Monday rolled around, she went to work as usual, and to her great relief, nobody at the office mentioned the scene I had caused at the dinner, not even her boss, who must have decided it was her personal business. What her colleagues said behind her back, though, was another story. The next shock came later that week, on Friday night. Laura unexpectedly initiated some intimacy. She was much more enthusiastic and adventurous than usual, which ended up being satisfying for both of us. This was completely different from her typical reserved demeanor. Naturally, I wondered if her newfound eagerness was somehow connected to my recent remarks about her having a lover. Laura fell asleep immediately after, but I stayed awake, my mind racing with too many questions to rest. The main thought plaguing me was, did she now prefer me being more assertive, compared to the laid-back version of myself? Nothing particularly noteworthy happened over the next few days, and it felt like maybe our relationship was starting to get back on track. But then, everything collapsed like a house of cards one morning. I noticed that Laura was dressed more nicely than usual and had even styled her hair. During breakfast, she casually mentioned that she might need to work overtime that day, something her boss had told her the day before. I couldn't hold back anymore. I asked, since when do you need to dress up for overtime? Wouldn't it be easier just to admit you're planning to see your lover again? Her stunned expression said it all before she erupted, yelling, have you completely lost your mind? You seriously need help for this paranoid behavior. Maybe it's best if we end this marriage. I snapped back, so you can see him openly without having to sneak around behind my back. Maybe I'm going crazy, but I'm not crazy enough to stay married to a cheating woman. Laura started sobbing, and soon after, our kids joined in, crying loudly. For a brief moment, I asked myself, what have I done to my family? I had instigated the biggest argument in our entire marriage without having any actual proof that Laura was cheating. The only thing fueling my accusations was this unsettling feeling that had kept me up all night. After some time, Laura tearfully asked, "Do you really want a divorce?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I don't see any other way. If you're intent on destroying our marriage, it's best for both of us to split and move on. I'm tired of being treated this way. I've had enough." Laura rushed back to the bedroom, and I was left sitting there with a sinking feeling of regret for accusing her without any solid evidence. I realized I had acted impulsively and handled everything wrong. I should have gathered facts before confronting her. If I had taken that route, I could have confronted her with undeniable proof. A few minutes later, Laura came back to the kitchen, now dressed in her usual everyday attire. She didn't say anything, and I had no idea what to say to her. It became painfully clear to me that only a miracle could save our marriage now. If Laura was truly innocent, the embarrassment I had caused her might be too much for her to bear. If she was guilty, our relationship would end the moment I discovered concrete evidence. That evening, Laura told me she had let her boss know that I wouldn't allow her to work overtime, and he had accepted it, likely because he knew me from the party. I should have followed up and called her boss to confirm, but I didn't. To my surprise, I received unexpected assistance from the new management team that had recently taken over the company where Laura worked. Their IT specialists conducted a discreet investigation into the employees' computer usage at the office. They discovered that the average time spent on personal activities was around 45 minutes per day. The worst offender had racked up a total of 15 hours in just 1 week. That following Monday, Laura's entire office staff was called into a meeting to be informed of the new company policies. Personal internet use was now completely banned, a measure aimed at saving both time and resources. The restructuring also meant that the 4 most recently hired employees were let go. Laura managed to keep her position, but from that point on, she had to use the computer at home for all her emails. Our kids had their own computers, but they didn't have internet access. I've always had a knack for computers, and I felt like I was finally on familiar ground. I had prepared the home computer by installing a program that mirrored all her activities, saving copies of everything she did. Additionally, I set up another program that could recover anything she deleted. A couple of days later, Laura set up a new free email account on our computer with the username Bright Morning in addition to her old Gmail address, which she typically used to chat with some of her old friends who had moved out of town. The new account didn't receive much, mostly junk mail and a few legitimate emails from someone going by the name Traveler on the Move. The emails Laura sent that first week were entirely innocent. She simply informed Traveler on the Move about her new email address and let him know she was online again. Even his first reply, which she tried to delete, didn't reveal much. Great to see my dear friend online again. One thing was certain, Laura was mixed up in something, and I had high hopes that I could gather more information about what that was. Of course, they could easily use their cell phones for most of their conversations, especially now that she was restricted to using the home computer. And Laura knew I was pretty tech-savvy. Still, I believed she would stick to emails for any longer, more detailed messages. I was determined that Laura wouldn't get half of our assets if she triggered a divorce by cheating. I had worked hard to provide for my family, and there was no way I was going to let some affair take a piece of that away. With that in mind, I started working on a plan to protect my finances. Since I was the sole owner of our house, I realized I could take out a significant loan for investments without Laura needing to sign any paperwork. To my surprise, the bank approved everything I requested. The next day, I told Laura that I had to go to Italy for final negotiations regarding some equipment for my job. She didn't raise any questions or objections since I'd taken similar trips before. The following day, I went to a local travel agency, bought a cheap plane ticket to Madrid, Spain, and even booked a hotel in a small town near the Portuguese border. As expected, Laura didn't bother checking in with my workplace to confirm that I had taken 3 days off. I flew to Madrid, then hopped on a bus to a small town near the border before crossing into Portugal. But there was no laundering of money involved, my time there was simply spent doing a bit of sightseeing around the area. The next morning, I caught the first flight back to Madrid and then headed home. Throughout the trip, I made sure to use my personal credit card for as many purchases as possible, making my trail easy to follow if anyone ever tried to track my movements. The only thing I could do at that time was to monitor what Laura was doing on our computer. Not much had surfaced so far, just one message from "Traveler on the Move," saying he was sitting alone in a hotel room and wished she were there to keep him company. Laura hadn't replied to him via email, so I decided to check her phone when she was in the shower, but as usual, all her messages had been deleted. Then finally, I hit the jackpot. His next email revealed some useful details. It read, "Hey, darling. Sorry, I was caught up meeting important clients up north while your annoying husband was in Italy. I missed your sweet kisses and warm embrace every night when I knew you were waiting for me. But here's some good news, next Thursday, I have the whole day off in town, and the only thing I've got planned is a dentist appointment between 9 and 10 a.m. After that, it's just you and me for the day. Please make sure you take off at least by 11 a.m. so we can be together. Matt." Now I knew his name and profession, which gave me a small glimmer of hope that she might respond using email. And she did. "Dear Matt, I'll definitely take the day off after 11 a.m. May I suggest we have a quiet lunch at your place? That way, people won't see us together in town when I leave work. I'm sure David still has his suspicions, so it's best we keep a low profile. I agree that taking a break from our usual routine will be good for both of us. I've been thinking about you often and can't wait for our day together. Love, Laura." I was able to secure an apartment rental, paying for a year up front, just in case I encountered any legal issues during the divorce. A salesperson named Matt with a generic last name in our town wasn't enough of a lead for me to track him down, it was far too common. However, I suspected he worked for the same company as Laura, and now that I knew the date and time of their rendezvous, I had a decent shot at tailing her to his place. Nowadays, most people use their phones for communication, and it was clear that Laura and Matt did the same, as I couldn't find much more through the computer. The day before Laura's expected meetup with him, I made sure everything was in place. I had emptied both my personal and our joint bank accounts, moving the money through hidden channels far away from the open market. I also rented a van with dark-tinted windows. To my surprise, Laura acted completely normal on the morning of her big day, no special outfit, no fancy hairstyle, no signs that she was about to spend the day with her lover. I briefly began to hope that maybe she had cancelled the whole thing. But I couldn't hide my tension, and Laura noticed. She gave me a worried look and asked, "Are you okay? You don't look well." What could I say? "I'm fine," I replied. "I've just been thinking about a few problems I need to handle today, but I've got it under control." She studied my face for a moment before saying, "I was worried, you're looking really pale." "No need for concern. I'm fine. Hey, how about we have lunch together today? There are some important things we should talk about." Once again, she seemed uneasy as she answered, "I'd love to, but I'm sorry, I can't. I've already committed to an important lunch meeting at work today. How about tomorrow instead?" I looked her directly in the eyes and said, "I understand. It's important to handle your obligations first." Now even Laura lost the color in her face. Hopefully, she gave a second thought to what she planned to do during the day. Of course, I wasn't far off, the future of our family hinged on her decisions over the next few hours. I feared that this was our last family breakfast together and that lunch would be cancelled forever. Laura left for work, taking Ethan with her to preschool. Chloe headed off to school, and I stayed behind for a while. I had taken a day off from my job, just as planned. At 10:30 a.m., I had the van parked strategically outside Laura's office, giving me a clear view of her parked car and the staff entrance. Thanks to the dark tinted windows, no one could see me sitting inside. 5 minutes after 11 o'clock, she walked out to the parking lot, got into her car, and drove to a residential area just outside the city center. She parked outside an apartment building and went inside. I followed her and checked the building directory. It showed that a Matt Robertson had an apartment on the second floor. I gave her 5 minutes before I called her cell phone. When she saw it was me, she answered, "Hi, what's up?" "You, Laura, are my biggest problem," I said. She sounded surprised as she replied, "Me? Have you lost your mind?" "No, darling, but I've found your lover boy." "Are you supposed to be at work, or are you with him?" "I'm on my way to deal with him. Get dressed and get out of his apartment before I get there." She sounded worried but said, "What are you talking about?" "Of course, I'm at work. If you're telling the truth, that's good for you. If not, things are about to get very bad." I ended the call. Now I was standing outside Matt's door with a sledgehammer and a black garbage bag. Just as I anticipated, a man in his mid-30s opened the door a minute later. I was ready with my right fist, and I hit him hard in the face. He was caught off guard, stumbling back into his apartment. A pale and terrified Laura stood behind him. I told her, "Get out of here now." Before she could respond, I shoved her out of the apartment and locked the door behind her. Alone with Matt, I unleashed a series of punches until he fell to the floor. In any other situation, this younger man, in good shape, probably would have overpowered me. But today, my rage fueled me, and I had the advantage. With him lying helpless on the floor, it was easy to keep hitting and kicking him. I grabbed the sledgehammer and smashed everything of value in his small, sparsely furnished apartment. It became obvious this wasn't his primary residence. I found Matt's cell phone and rifled through some papers in his briefcase, which included his home address and personal information. Meanwhile, Laura was outside, frantically ringing the doorbell and shouting, "Don't hurt him. Please, don't hurt him." I opened the door, dragged Laura back inside, and told her, "He's yours now. Be with him as much as you want. I don't care about either of you anymore." Laura's shock deepened as she surveyed the damage I had inflicted on Matt and his apartment. She started sobbing, "Please, let me explain. Please, just listen to me, David." I cut her off. "Shut up," I said coldly, before walking out to the van, where I went through Matt's documents. It turned out that Matt was a sales manager for the same company as Laura, but he lived with his family near the national capital. That explained the small apartment he maintained in our town. Matt had destroyed my marriage, and, as the old saying goes, an eye for an eye. I had only one thing left to do. First, I called Laura's parents and asked them to take care of our kids after school, telling them I had to work late and that Laura was dealing with some personal issues. They agreed to handle it. Then, I switched off my phone and went on a 2-day break with the rented van. I'm afraid I can't go into detail about what I did during that trip. This forum has too many readers in the Midwest, likely including those investigating my actions. I'd rather not drag innocent people into trouble by saying too much. Back in town 2 days later, I switched my phone back on and found countless messages from Laura. My only reply to her was a text message, "I've filed for divorce, and that is my final decision regarding our marriage." After that, I spent the rest of the day moving my clothes and personal items out of our house and into my new apartment. I left copies of the divorce papers on the kitchen table. Laura's affair with Matt had clearly lasted for several months. If it had been a single lapse in judgment after the Christmas party, there might have been a small chance I could have forgiven her. Or if my comments during that last breakfast had made her cancel the date with him, it would have spared Matt from the beating I gave him. The next day, I went to work as usual, but to my surprise, Laura didn't call. The only call I received regarding Matt came from the police. They wanted to talk with me, and since both Laura and I were busy, we scheduled it for 3 weeks later. After lunch, I called Laura's mother, who told me the kids were staying with her for a few days and that Laura wasn't contesting the divorce. 3 days later, Laura herself called, enraged that our bank accounts were drained to zero. She shouted about suing me for that and for destroying Matt's apartment. I calmly told her, lost money can be replaced, but the love and family we've lost can never be mended. That answer didn't satisfy her. 3 weeks later, my lawyer and I went to meet with the police. The conversation remained civil, and my lawyer had no objections to what was discussed. The police accused me of beating Matt so severely that he couldn't work for weeks and of wrecking both his apartment and house. I denied everything except the fact that I acted in self-defense. I claimed that Laura's frantic and aggressive lover had attacked me when I interrupted their date. The detective seemed like he was just going through the motions and didn't put much effort into pursuing the case. Clearly, he didn't have much sympathy for a cheating wife and her paramour. I didn't care either way because if I were found guilty and ordered to pay damages to Matt, it wouldn't help him. The ruling would just be a piece of paper giving him legal permission to seek payment, but since I didn't have any money, that would be his issue, not something the legal system would trouble itself with. To my surprise, Laura called me shortly afterward and suggested we meet to discuss the kids over dinner at a restaurant. I agreed, and we managed to keep things civil. Laura surprised me by confessing that her affair with Matt began just a few weeks after she started her new job. There had been a reshuffling of the sales department, and Laura, working as Matt's assistant, had immediately felt a spark between them. A lunch at Matt's small apartment had ended up in his bed, and their affair continued. However, the opportunities to meet were limited since Matt rarely came by the main office. When his wife couldn't attend the Christmas party, Matt saw it as a golden chance to spend the entire night with Laura. She told me she had her doubts but gave in after some convincing, which she now admitted was the most foolish decision of her life. Laura confessed that despite her affair with Matt, I and the kids were always her top priority. She claimed she had never stopped loving me, even when I began accusing her of cheating. They had planned to end things after my confrontation, and she had already thought of ways to show me she was committed to being a faithful wife again. She mentioned that with Matt's wife gone, they had even considered moving in together, but she promised she'd break it off with him instantly if I gave her another chance. I simply told her, I'm sorry, but it hurts too much. We agreed that Laura would have primary custody of the kids, and they could visit me as often as they wished. After a moment of hesitation, she brought up the topic of money. I noticed her eyes fill with tears when I told her that I had lost everything due to poor financial decisions and that she was paying the price for choosing to end things between us. I explained that the emotional cost of losing my family was much more painful than losing money. Once more, Laura swore she would do whatever it took to bring the family back together if I forgave her. But I told her that I would rather have a cheating ex-wife than a cheating partner. Before we parted ways, I warned her that hiring a lawyer to track down the missing money would cost her a fortune and leave her empty-handed. That following Monday morning at work, my assistant, Emma, came in, and I immediately noticed that something was seriously wrong. She had sunglasses on, but when she removed them, I could see a noticeable black eye on her left side. Her right eye was puffy, as if she had spent the weekend crying heavily. Initially, she refused to say anything, but after a few minutes, she admitted, I'm a single mom now. What happened? I asked, shocked. Matt and I are over, she replied. I was surprised since I had always thought of Emma and Matt as the perfect couple. Why? I asked, confused. Because getting hit once by your husband is an awful experience that can be forgiven as a mistake. But when it happens again, it's a dangerous habit that shouldn't be accepted or overlooked. A man who hits his wife twice will keep doing it, with less and less reason each time. Matt hit me for the second time, and I'm divorcing him. I thought he was a good guy, and you two seemed like the ideal couple. What made him turn into this? I asked. Jealousy. The first time he hit me was at a wedding when I danced a steamy tango with a charming South American guy. He was a fantastic dancer, but it was just a harmless tango, and for some reason, it made Matt furious enough to hit me. None of the other men cared when that guy danced with their wives. I eventually forgave Matt but told him the next time it happened would be the last. He promised me it would never happen again, but it did. So now, we're getting divorced. I was still processing what Emma had just told me. Why did he hit you this time? I asked, baffled by the whole situation. Emma looked down at her hands, which were trembling slightly. Because he thinks it's my fault you and Laura split up, she said softly. I was completely lost. What? How could that possibly be your fault? Laura had an affair with Matt. That's got nothing to do with you. Emma took a deep breath and replied, she did it because Matt thought you and I were having an affair. I was so shocked that I practically shouted, you and I had what? An affair? Us? When? How? No, we didn't. We'd be the first ones to know, wouldn't we? But Matt believed it and hit you. I could hardly process how a good man like Matt could turn into such a jealous madman, causing Emma to end their marriage. I had always admired Emma, but I'd never made inappropriate comments or suggestions. Of course, deep down, if I had to choose, I'd probably have picked Emma over Laura. But still, there had never been anything between us. It was just absurd. What could I say to that? I asked her. Why didn't he come to me? I've never cheated on Laura, even though I've had plenty of chances over the years. Sure, I can admit I might have envied him a little for being married to you, the woman of my dreams, but there's a huge difference between having a fantasy and acting on it. Where did he even get these ridiculous ideas? Why didn't he try to find out the truth? Emma shrugged. Some of Matt's friends heard rumors and told him, she explained. Rumors? I repeated, stunned. Why didn't he ask you? Why didn't he ask me? How could he be so foolish to believe that without even trying to find out the truth? Emma gave a small, shaky laugh. He asked, she said quietly, but he asked with his fists. It was unbelievable. Shaking my head in disbelief, I muttered, well, now that your dream girl is single, I trailed off with a teasing smile. Emma raised an eyebrow and said, your place or mine? I chuckled, trying to ease the tension, but inwardly, I was feeling a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Mine will be fine, I replied, matching her playful tone. Deal. After about an hour of chatting and easing into this strange new dynamic, Emma asked quietly, are you still serious about our date? I flashed her a smile and replied, I'm not one to back out. What you've offered me today, well, it's something that only comes once in a lifetime. She gave a soft smile in return. Are you sure I've offered you anything? I laughed lightly. No, I admitted, and I don't expect anything. But a date's a date. Emma nodded and said, okay, a date will be a date. Though we kept things light-hearted, we both knew that this day marked a turning point in our lives. The tension between us was real, and after lunch, Emma took the rest of the day off work. Later, after doing some shopping, I went home to my apartment. I didn't really expect her to show up, but at 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. There she was, standing at my doorstep, holding a small overnight bag. Just in case you were serious about our date, she said, flashing a mischievous smile. I answered, feeling the weight of the moment. It had been a long and draining day for her, with a tough meeting with her lawyer about the divorce. I suggested she rest while I made us dinner. After eating, we sat on the couch, talking for hours about our failed marriages. She asked me several times if I'd ever consider taking Laura back, and I told her every time that it wasn't even an option. We went to bed early that night, but I didn't make any moves toward intimacy. To my surprise, she slept soundly and woke up feeling a little better. The following weekend, we decided to rent a minivan and take her 2 kids, along with mine, to the nearest zoo. To our great relief, everything went incredibly well. By the end of the day, we both knew we could blend our families and move in together. That Sunday evening, after dropping the kids off with our exes, we had a romantic dinner at one of the finest restaurants in town. Back at my apartment, as soon as the door closed behind us, we began kissing passionately. We undressed each other in a rush before falling onto the bed. Since she made no effort to stop anything, we allowed things to progress naturally. After resting for a while, we continued with tender lovemaking in various positions, savoring the newfound connection between us. Emma confided in me that she was overjoyed with how our first night together had gone, genuine love, tender yet intense. We were both satisfied, especially me, because Emma's passion far exceeded anything I'd experienced with Laura in our final months together. Laura's lawyer eventually caught wind of my brief trip to Spain and attempted to use it against me during the divorce proceedings. I was bombarded with questions about that trip, but since I stuck to the same simple, honest story every time, there wasn't much they could hold over me. Despite Laura's lawyer's deep dive into my so-called missing money, the divorce wrapped up as anticipated. Laura ended up with 50% of absolutely nothing and a sizable debt to her attorney. At one point, during a conversation about our kids, I said to her, "You should have listened when I warned you about the dangers of chasing after lost money." Tears welled up in her eyes as she responded, "How could you take all our money? How could you do that to me? How could you cheat on me?" I countered, "How could you do that to us?" Her response took me off guard. "Because I was a fool. It's the biggest mistake of my entire life." "Does Matt know you regret what happened?" I asked, genuinely curious. "He does," she admitted. "He's suffering too. We've both paid dearly for our affair. But you must be happy now that you're with Emma." I sighed, reflecting on everything. "Just remember, I gave you a choice that morning, at our last family breakfast, and you chose Matt over a simple lunch with me. That's when you made your biggest mistake. I lost the woman I loved, but you lost your family." Laura wept softly, nodding. "I know. Now Matt and I are both stuck with the consequences, but we're making the best of a bad situation. Are you happy?" I hesitated, then answered, "Yes, I'm happy with Emma. But neither of us wanted to be divorced. We both would have preferred to raise our kids in a home with 2 parents. We're making it work, though, and we're grateful to have each other." In the end, Laura and Matt bought my old house for a steep price, assuming all the loans that came with it. Their monthly payments were much higher than what Laura and I had faced. Meanwhile, Emma's ex-husband bought out her share of their old place for a fair amount, and she used that money to invest in a new home, where she and I now live together. The police never followed up with me about the destruction I'd caused at Matt's property near the Capitol. From what I'd heard, the house had belonged solely to his ex-wife, and she had already claimed most of the insurance payout. Besides, the authorities were too understaffed and disorganized to deal with inter-district matters. As a result of my actions, I was sentenced to 2 months in a white-collar jail and ordered to compensate Matt for both the beating and the damages in his small apartment here in town. I haven't paid him a dime, and I don't plan to. I told him I'd pay when I had money, but as long as I don't, there's nothing the authorities can do to help him collect. Emma and I both left our old jobs behind, and I now work part-time for her new consulting firm. I drive a company car, and I'm technically a lodger in her house, a setup that works out well for both of us. Laura, however, hasn't given up her search for the missing money. One evening, she invited Emma out to a pub under the pretense of discussing the kids. After a few drinks, she started probing Emma for information about the money. But Emma had no answers to offer. She told Laura the truth, that she knew nothing about any hidden assets and didn't care about them. To Emma, I was the best thing she'd ever gained in her life. Emma and I had always been a great team, both at work and at home. Our blended family had come together beautifully, with plenty of fun moments and a strong, intimate connection. My kids got along well with Emma, and her children had grown quite fond of me, too. Life seemed to be going smoothly until I started hearing rumors around town. Word had it that Matt, her ex, had been bragging about winning Emma back. Apparently, he had been seeing an expensive therapist weekly and claimed to be cured of his issues. I didn't bring it up with Emma because I figured it was her decision to make, and I trusted her. Emma's ex-in-laws, however, were far from accepting of her departure from their son. They frequently called, attempting to lure her back to Matt with promises of gifts like a new car or a luxurious vacation if she would reconcile with him. One evening, Emma looked unusually concerned as she sat down next to me and said, "I got invited to Matt's younger sister's wedding. You want to go?" I asked, already sensing her hesitation. "I'd like to," she admitted, "but if you have any objections, I'll stay home." "Why would I have any objections?" I asked. She sighed, clearly uneasy. "Because I know Matt's parents will push hard to get us back together, and a wedding is the perfect setting for them to work their magic. I'm torn because I was really close to his sister, and I'd like to see her on her big day." I smiled, trying to reassure her. "You're an adult, Emma. If you want to go, go. It'll be nice for you to see her, especially if this wedding is a last-ditch effort to keep her relationship going." Emma still looked doubtful. "So, are you sure you don't have any objections?" "None," I said. "I trust you, and I have no reason to object. One reason might be that there will probably be drinking, and I'll need to stay overnight." "Doesn't that worry you?" she asked, testing me. "No," I said calmly. "Why would it? You're a grown woman, and I trust you completely. I love you, Emma." Her expression softened, and she smiled. "I love you too." Matt's hometown was about 40 miles away, and Emma left early Saturday morning, planning to come back on Sunday. I didn't ask for many details because I believed it was up to her to decide how to handle things. We agreed on one phone call, where she let me know she'd arrived safely, and I wished her a fun time at the wedding. Before she left, she gave me a warm hug and kiss, and I returned it, though part of me was anxious about the weekend. To be honest, I'd been dreading this day more than I cared to admit. Anything could happen at that wedding, and I knew she'd face pressure from Matt, his parents, and all their friends. Since Laura had the kids, I spent most of the day getting some work done. That evening, I grabbed dinner and drinks with some friends at a local pub but didn't stay long. I picked up a light-hearted comedy on DVD and watched it before heading to bed. To my surprise, Emma returned home by 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, much earlier than expected. She hugged me tightly, then led me to the bedroom. She stripped, pulled me onto the bed, and whispered into my ear, "I missed you so much. Make love to me." I happily obliged. Afterward, she looked at me, her face still flushed, and asked, "Did I shock you by coming home all worked up?" "You gave me a very pleasant surprise," I said, grinning. "I love you so much for trusting me," she continued, "and for letting me go to the wedding, even though you knew they'd try hard to get me back with Matt." "I knew what might happen," I replied, "but I was confident you could handle it." Emma smiled, satisfied. "Yes, I handled it just fine." Emma then shared with me how the situation at the wedding had unfolded. Several of Matt's relatives were staying overnight at his parents' house, and they had arranged for Matt and her to share a small room with only one bed. The bride had given Emma a heads-up about the sleeping arrangements, though Emma had already anticipated something like that might happen. Thankfully, she had booked a hotel room in advance. She ended up leaving the party early when the drunken comments about her taking Matt back started to feel less like jokes and more like pressure. She skipped the Sunday dinner with Matt's family and left her hotel after an early breakfast. One thing was certain, Emma and I had built a strong, trusting relationship. Just last week, when Laura and I met at a cafe to discuss plans for the kids over the coming months, I couldn't help but notice that she looked more unhappy than usual. There was a weariness in her posture, and a sadness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. I found myself asking, "Are things okay between you and Matt?" She hesitated, her expression uncertain, before sighing and admitting, "No, we're having problems." Her voice trembled slightly as she looked down at her cup. "I wouldn't even hesitate to say yes if you asked me to come back to you." I wasn't particularly shocked by her admission. The kids had already shared a few stories about the tension between Laura and Matt. I knew things were far from perfect in their relationship. "He cheated on his wife before," I said. "And I'm sure you weren't the only one during that time. Do you think he's cheating on you now?" Tears welled up in Laura's eyes, and she nodded as her sobs grew louder. "Yes, I think so. I don't have solid proof, but I feel it in my gut. It's the same way you knew about me. And now I understand how much it hurts." I felt a brief surge of sympathy for her. Despite everything, Laura had been a significant part of my life, and I took no joy in watching her suffer. But there was also an undeniable sense of justice in seeing her experience the same heartache that she had once inflicted on me. I leaned back in my chair, taking in her tear-streaked face. "So what are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never thought it would come to this. I thought Matt and I could make it work. But he's been so distant. Just like I was with you. Now I get it. I see how I pushed you away, how I didn't care about your feelings. I ignored the damage I was doing." She dabbed her eyes with a napkin, her hands shaking. "I hate that I'm in this position, and I hate that I put you through the same thing. You didn't deserve any of it." I stayed quiet, not sure what to say. There was no point in rehashing the past or offering reassurances that couldn't undo what had already happened. The pain had been caused, and now Laura was dealing with the consequences of her actions. I finally steered the conversation back to more neutral ground. "What about the kids? How are they doing with everything at your place?" "They're doing okay, I guess," she said, her voice softer. "But I can tell they miss the way things were, they miss having us both around. I can see it on their faces when they come back from spending time with you." "Kids are resilient," I said. "They're adapting. We've managed to co-parent pretty well so far, and I think they're finding some stability in that." Laura nodded, but I could tell her mind was elsewhere. After a long silence, she finally said, "I've made so many mistakes, David. I think about it all the time. I lost you, and now I'm losing Matt, and I don't know how to fix any of it." "Maybe you can't fix it," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Some things can't be fixed, Laura. You just have to move forward." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine as though hoping I might offer her some kind of lifeline, a way to come back. For a fleeting moment, there was a glimmer of hope in her gaze. But I didn't offer her that chance. I had moved on, and my future was with Emma now. Laura took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping in defeat as she spoke softly, "I guess you're right. Moving forward is all that's left for me." We exchanged a few more words, mostly about the kids and the logistics for the upcoming holidays. As we wrapped up the conversation, there was an odd sense of finality in the air. Walking away from the cafe, I felt something I hadn't expected, a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free, liberated from the past I had shared with Laura, and from all the emotional baggage our marriage had left behind. When I got home, Emma greeted me at the door with her usual warm smile. She could always read me so well. "How did it go with Laura?" she asked, her voice gentle as she sensed I had a lot on my mind. "It went fine," I said, smiling as I pulled her close and kissed her on the forehead. "She's having a tough time with Matt. Things aren't looking too good for them." Emma didn't look surprised at all. Well, she said softly, she made her choices. And you made yours. I nodded in agreement, meeting her eyes. I'm glad I made the right one, I replied, feeling the certainty of my decision in every word. The rest of the evening passed quietly. We spent it relaxing together, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that a chapter of my life had finally come to a close. Laura had been a significant part of my journey for so many years. And while I no longer harbored any romantic feelings for her, the reality of her downfall left a bittersweet sadness in its wake, not because of what we could have been, but because of how it all had to end. As time went on, my relationship with Emma continued to grow stronger. We were a team, whether it was managing life at home or working side by side at her new consulting business. Life with her was steady, filled with genuine love, and far more peaceful than anything I'd ever experienced. We were happy, truly happy, and dedicated to building a future together that was full of joy and security. However, Laura's troubles weren't over. One evening, as Emma and I were winding down, she told me something that made me chuckle. Laura called me earlier today, she said, shaking her head with a mixture of disbelief and sympathy. She's still searching for that money. She's convinced you hid it somewhere. I laughed softly. I warned her before, didn't I? She won't find what's not there. Emma's face softened as she thought about it. I don't think it's about the money anymore. I think she's just grasping for anything that might give her some control over her life. She's spiraling. That's not something I can fix, I said, my voice firm. She's on her own now. Emma nodded in agreement, and just like that, we moved on to planning our weekend getaway with the kids. It was all I could focus on now, our life, our future, and the happiness we were creating together. One thing was certain, no matter what path Laura and Matt ended up on, or how much she kept searching for answers or some hidden fortune, I had moved on. My life with Emma was everything I wanted it to be, and I had no intention of looking back. The story had come full circle. Laura's choices led her down a road of regret, but I had found something more precious, a life built on trust, loyalty, and love. Though the past had its share of pain, it had also brought me lessons I would never forget. And, in the end, I found peace and redemption, knowing that moving forward was the only way to truly heal.